folks, welcome back. So, today is a very special presentation because it will mark the final presentation of our personality series, and we will be talking about the cognitive approach to understanding personality. We will be looking at the theory, application, assessment, and research under this approach towards understanding personality. So the outline for today's presentation is we'll be looking at what personal construct theory is, the cognitive personality variables, cognitive representations of the self, where we will talk about cognition and gender, cognition aggression, cognition and depression, followed by the application and assessment of these theories in the real world. And we will end the presentation with the strengths and criticisms of the cognitive approach. So, cognitive models of personality have become popular in recent years, but they're not entirely new. An early predecessor can be found in Kurt Levin's field theory of behavior. Levin described the mental representations we form of the important elements in our lives and how we organize those elements within our life space. Kurt Levin is right here, the first picture above here. And the basic crux of the cognitive approach is that differences in personality are differences in the way people process information. Cognition is processing of information. It's our thoughts, how our thoughts, our processes, mental processes work. And so the essence of personality differences amongst people are based in the essence of how people process information. And so Kurt Levin was a proponent of this theory, and he was an early predecessor actually, and he was a little bit about him. He was German-American psychologist, known as one of the modern pioneers of social, organizational, and applied psychology in the United States. Levin's field theory proposed that behavior is the result of the individual and the environment, okay? And that's what his field theory proposes. More importantly, cognitive personality theory was actually developed by George Kelly. So the picture down here, that's George Kelly. And George Alexander Kelly was his name. He was an American psychologist, therapist, educator, and personality theorist. He is considered the father of cognitive clinical psychology and is best known for his theory of personality, personal construct psychology. Since the publication of his book, The Psychology of Personal Constructs, in 1955, Kelly's work has evolved in a rich source of ideas for personal researchers and psychotherapists. So he sort of set the premise for many approaches identified as cognitive today. So what is the personal construct theory? So George Kelly's approach to personality begins with a unique conception of humankind. He called it a man the scientist perspective. Like scientists, people constantly generate and test hypotheses about their world. And he coined something known as template matching. That is, our ideas about the world are similar to templates that we place over the events we encounter. If they match, we retain the templates. If not, we modify them for a better prediction next time. Okay? So to get a rough idea of what your own personal constructs are, ask yourself what you tend to notice about people when you first meet them. The first few thoughts that come in mind are probably some of the constructs you typically use to make sense of other people and their behaviors. And so personal construct theory, what do personal constructs mean? They're cognitive structures people use to interpret and predict events. People do not use identical personal constructs, and they do not organize constructs in an identified manner. And so let's say you meet someone for the first time. Some of the construct could be the construct of friendliness. So you would evaluate them by saying, oh, how friendly or unfriendly the person is, or how intelligent or unintelligent the person is. So The personal construct theory, the application of the first construct is followed by other bipolar constructs. That's what George Kelly said. And he said it determines the extent of the blackness or whiteness. Differences in personality result from differences in the way people construe the world. Okay, so what does personal construct theory mean? It's how we personally construe the world, the personal constructs we create to see the world, through which we perceive the world. So remember how we've been talking about how our unconscious mind determines our personality, how our environment determines our personality, but the cognitive approach goes a step higher in the processes that we have described, and it says that it's not actually the environment that determines a person's personality, but it is the perception of the environment, the processes that are um, embedded within the perceptions of a person's environment that lead to how a person's personality is shaped. Okay, so initial thoughts of people to make sense of others and their behavior. Um, so, how people construe the world are basically the initial thoughts of people that they have to, which they use to make sense of others and their own behaviors. Individuals may use the same constructs and construe the world differently. Okay, so again, you can also have the same constructs, like let's say you are basing your evaluation of the world, of people, through how friendly they are, how intelligent they are, but at the same time you can construe them differently, right? Because at the end of the day, it's your sort of ranking system, right? How you rank people on those constructs. So people suffer from psychological problems due to defects in their construct systems. Now remember, in the previous theoretical approach, which was behaviorism, we said that people's internal locus of control, external locus of control is what determines their personality, right? And psychopathology is largely because of external locus of control, where people, especially depression, where people don't feel like they have this internal working mechanism that can control their hopelessness, that can shape how helpless or hopeless they're feeling, to feel less of that. They feel that they don't have that inside them. They desire external help, or they actually need that external help. Now, under this theory, which is personal construct theory within the cognitive school of thought, what we see is that inadequate personal constructs are what lead to psychological problems. So, if you have a certain construct that, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, or you say that maybe your construct is fitness and you don't feel mentally fit, how fit or unfit you feel, you're sort of on the unfit side. That is what leads to psychological problems. So, past traumatic experiences are not the cause of the problems. People become anxious when personal constructs fail to make sense of the events in their lives. Okay? So, again, like I shared with you, personal constructs sound like a very fancy word, but it's actually perception, put in short. Okay? So, it's not actually the trauma or the traumatic event that causes the issue. It's the fact that your perception of reality does not match, or does not do justice. It doesn't fit into conceptualizing the adverse traumatic experience that you have witnessed and experienced firsthand, or maybe vicariously. And so people become anxious, not because of the problem by itself, but because of how they're perceiving it, and what construct they're using to perceive it. And maybe they need to build a new construct, a new perception to heal. And the whole point of therapy is helping to generate these new constructs to replace the inadequate ones. So let's talk about the concept of the idea of relationships again. And here I'm going back and forth because that's something that most people can relate to. So let's say you had a breakup, right? Or someone said, no, I can't see you anymore, or something like that. Now, in the moment, it can be a very traumatizing experience because, you know, it's it doesn't really match your construct of reality. It doesn't really match your pre-existing perception of what the relationship was or could have been, right? And so your perception is that, oh, I the relationship could have been, um, better, or your perception could be that your relationship um, was going in such a good direction. What suddenly happened? So now when someone this adversity strikes, where someone is breaking up with you, you can't use the same lens of perception to understand, to make sense of that trauma. And that is why you start feeling anxious. That is why you feel the pain, because you don't necessarily have the tool as of yet to make sense of why this person broke up with you. Like, what is it about you? Or maybe you're using perceptions that are inadvocate, something like, because I'm not good enough, because I'm not that pretty, or maybe because I'm not that intelligent, or because I'm not that, there are so many causes that you can give that would justify or not justify why the trauma happened. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what the trauma is. What matters more is what type of a perception, especially a healthier one, you form to help yourself feel a certain way. That's all that matters when you are in a traumatic situation, when you're going through a breakup or anything like that. People generate a new construct to replace the inadvocate one. That is what the experience teaches us, to create new constructs, to create newer perceptions. So let's say something about the relationship or something about the breakup has bothered you, right? And you feel that you're not worthy of this person. You feel worthless. You feel like, you're not good enough, and that's why the person rejected you. And so that can be very traumatizing, because it makes you feel like, you're not a desirable person, and that can be very painful. However, that is, at the end of the day, your perception. So remember this, it is your perception, and psychotherapy helps you create new perceptions of reality that are healthy for you. Amongst a gazillion constructs that you can create one that is healthy. So instead of saying, I'm not worthy, that's why this person rejects me, that's why this person doesn't want to be with me, instead of that, you could come up with your own perception, which says something like, well, that person is not really in the best place right now. It's got nothing to do with me, right? And most of the times, that's usually the deal, because if you really think about it, very few things in life are, it's basically, it's healthier to not take things personally, because much of the time people are sort of living in their own frame, their own reality of the world. And so, think about the theory, the personal construct theory, in terms of your own life, in terms of what makes you anxious, what makes you nervous, what causes pain, hurt, suffering, struggle, strife, all of those things in your life, and then see what kind of constructs are there through which you are seeing these experiences, and see if you can create newer, healthier constructs through which you can eliminate those feelings of anxiety, those feelings of hurt, right? Okay, so moving on. Cognitive personality variables. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Um, So, cognitive personality psychologists maintain that the elements between stimulus and response are the key to understanding personality and its behavior. So, it's not so much the stimulus and the response, right? Like the behavior is said, it's the stimulus, the response, done. But they said it's the meat of what determines personality is actually between them. It is the person itself. It is the elements that occur within the person that lead to that response. So, in recent years, these psychologists have introduced a large number of the cognitive variables to account for individual differences in the way people act. Some of these variables are called cognitive affective units. So, what they did was they coined a term for the elements that fall between a stimulus and a response, and they called it cognitive affective units. And this is what constitutes individual differences in people. So part of a complex system that links situations between situations people encounter with their behavior. Okay? So cognitive affective units are part of a complex system that links situations, which is your environment, and situations people encounter with their behavior. So it is that middle part between stimulus and response, your cognitive affective units, how you think, how you feel, and your perceptions, which shape that. Individual difference in cognitive framework is due to difference in mental representations of people, again coming down to the idea of perceptions. Individuals differ in the manner they access stored information. People react to the same situation differently. Why? Because our perceptions are different. Now, the cognitive affective units, some examples are encodings, categories for encoding information about oneself, people, events, situations. So what does encoding mean? It basically means kind of like your belief systems, right? What do you encode? What are you kind of putting in your memory? What are you feeding to your system? What are you programming within your mind? Like, are you a worthy person? Are you loved? Are you cared for? Are you someone that people don't really love and appreciate? And then are you looking, therefore you're responding based on that cognitive affective unit, that encoding, that sort of information. Expectations and belief, expectations for what will happen in certain situations, for outcomes for certain behaviors, and for one's personal efficacy. So again, expectations are also another cognitive affective unit. So between stimulus and response is also your expectation of the stimulus and the response, which leads you to behave in a certain way, and then that forms your personality. So all of these variables are what determines your personality. So how you think, your expectations, your beliefs, when these things go on in a consistent, characteristic, idiosyncratic pattern, that determines your personality. Okay, so the affects are your feelings, emotions, your emotional responses. Your goals and values are also part of it. Your competencies and self-regulatory plans, which are your abilities. Like if you think you're able to do a certain thing, then you can. And so all of these form that part of your memory of your memory, your beliefs, your expectations, your goals, your values, your competencies. All of these come together to form that foundation within you that leads to certain responses. I'm sorry, my puppy's barking in the back. Please forgive me for that disturbance. So the cognitive model of personality goes something like this. We have the situation, right? So the situation can be myriad different things, A, B, C, D, F, G, anything, right? And now the behaviors is the response to the situation. However, this is the cognitive affective system between the stimulus and the response, okay? The cognitive affective system are these cognitive affective units. So this bubble can be your expectations. This bubble can be your goals. This bubble can be your encoding. This bubble can be your values. This bubble can be your goals. This bubble can be your competencies. And they all feed on each other. They interact with each other. And that leads to behavior, which in turn feedbacks to the stimulus. So cognitive representations of the self, mental representations are unique to individuals. Okay, and so it's not just perceptions that determine your responses to certain events in life, but these perceptions are also unique to individuals, and it's your perceptions are kind of like the result of your own self-concept. Remember, self-concept is such an important concept here. That's so funny. Self-concept is such an important concept here. Anyway, so how you conceptualize yourself makes a huge difference. And self concept basically means a cognitive representation of oneself, how you think, feel, and believe about yourself. And if it's relatively stable over time, it plays a central role in the way people process information, right? So you have a certain concept about yourself. You think that you're worthy of love. You think you're worthy of living in a big mansion. You're worthy of this, that, blah, blah, blah. And that in turn, and this makes a huge difference, guys, like a huge difference. How you conceptualize yourself really determines the way you respond to events, the way you react, the way you um, behave, and the way that characteristic way of thinking, feeling, and behaving in turn results in your personality. So do keep this in mind. Think of think about what determines your concept of yourself. Like, what is your self concept? Is it a good one? Is it a bad one? Does it shift from one situation to another? And how does that associate with the way you act in different situations? Self schemas, these are cognitive representations of oneself that one uses to organize and process self relevant information. So anything that falls within your self concept, you absorb. Anything that falls outside of your self concept, you eliminate. So given the example of breaking up again, let's say the person said they're breaking up with you because they just want their own stuff. If your self concept is a weak one, that, oh, he's breaking up with me because I'm not good enough, then no. Or just, let's just say your self concept is that you're not good enough, right? So you might end up thinking that regardless of what reason the person is breaking up with you, even if it's got nothing to do with you, you will nonetheless associate that with your own self concept and be like, they broke up with me because I'm not good enough, which may not even be true. So it's very important to know what your self concept is and how it's sort of shaping the way you perceive the world. People behave differently due to individual difference in self schemas. It provides a framework for organizing and storing information. There's something called the self reference effect, which means easy remembering of self referent words as they're processed through self schemas. So we'll give you an example here. So self schemas, so this is yourself, this is your parents, your identification with gender, your clothing, the type of school you go to, whether you like basketball or not, geography. So all of these reference, right? These are connected to yourself. These are all your self schemas. Like, do I like wine? Am I close to my parents? So all of that is your self concept and self schema. And they found that people's recall actually got really good when they were given words that describe themselves. So self schemas, like we shared here, in the self reference effect, it helps you remember better if there are self referent words. So you will so basically self referent effect basically means that, and again it also means why you fall in certain situations more than others, right? In life in general. So what it's basically saying is that you can actually be given a bunch of words, okay? And the words that you most closely associate your self concept and your self schema to are the ones that you recall the best, okay? So if someone gives you a bunch of cards and says, okay, which one describes you? And you see friendly, joyful, happy, loving, caring, you will remember that most likely versus other words such as serious, withdrawn, so things that are associated with you, you tend to remember that more. And this experiment sort of supported that hypothesis. Now there is the idea of possible selves, and possible selves are cognitive representations of the kind of person we might become someday. Now remember how we spoke about Carl Rogers' ideal self under the humanistic approach to personality? This is something like that. in here, behavior is influenced by cognitive representations of your present and future self. It provides incentives for future behavior. It helps to interpret the meaning of behaviors and events in our lives. Okay, so when you have the idea of what you could possibly become, it provides two things. One is that you can see yourself in the future, and so it provides that sort of incentive, right? Okay, this is the person I see myself in the future, and this is the person I want to become. And then the second is that it helps you to interpret the meaning of behavior and events in your lives. Okay, so okay, so the meaning of behavior and events in our lives. Um, you could say, all right, this is my possible self. I'm going to be like this. The reason this happened is so I could be this, right? So that provides a good interpretation for some experiences that happen in your life because you have this possible idea of a possible future self. So what researchers did, they used possible selves to study varied behaviors like binge drinking, academic performance, weight loss, adherence to exercise program. If you believe that your possible self, that your future self is going to be, going to overcome binge drinking, is going to be really good academically, is going to lose weight, then you will. Researchers indicate also that gender differences in the possible selves of young men and women. What they found is that men and women differ in the extent to which self-relevant information is associated with emotions, and information about themselves is connected with information about personal relationships. Okay, so um, So with women, they found that they encode information about themselves. They're more towards the emotion side. They associate with emotions, whatever they feel about themselves. They possess a stronger cognitive link between emotional memory and another, and they recall emotional memories better than males, regardless of the age. So here you could see a graph again, and you see that the darker bar is the women and men is the lighter bar, and you see they looked at the number of events recalled, and they found that for women they were able to recall emotional memories a lot better than men, and for men they were able to recall historical facts a lot better than women. And so can you see, like, there's also gender differences in the way people people have this idea of possible self and their own self controls. So, recalling emotional childhood memories too, as you can see, women are again the blue bar, the blue line, and men are the black line. And you can see across the board in different conditions, whether they were put in happy, sad, angry, fear, all of these conditions, women were able to recall more number of memories across these conditions versus men. In other words, it could also be, I think, environmental conditioning. If you think about it, like men might even be shy to recall emotional memories because they're just, the society doesn't, like discourages that type of behavior. Whereas in women, they can more freely express themselves emotionally. So that could be one of the rationalizations for this difference as well. So, men and women form different cognitive representations of themselves. Men develop independent self-construals. Women develop interdependent self-construals, more likely to define themselves based on the relationships they share with others when it comes to women. Now, let's talk about cognition and aggression, the general aggression model. So, aggression is likely when a situation includes provocation, frustration, or encouragement to act violently. Personal and situational factors are relevant to the extent that they activate aggression related thoughts and emotions. Act of violence can occur when aggressive thoughts enter people's awareness and remain easily accessible. And aggressive behavior skips also determine aggression, where they represent the way people act or represent ways to act that people have learned and practiced. A person's aggressiveness depends on the accessibility of the behavior script. Okay, so as you can see here, social encounters, person and situation. This is the model, okay? And both person and situation leads to hostile thoughts, and then you have something called the aggression script. you create this script that represents the way you should act or you've learned to act. And then you appraise what's going on and you make a decision. Either you can take a thoughtful action or an impulsive action. So that's one way to understand how between the stimulus and the response there's a whole bunch of cognitive stuff that's going on. If you look at cognition and depression, you'll see that the depressive cognitive triad can also be explained through the cognitive framework. So depressed people have negative thoughts about themselves. They feel pessimistic about the future and they interpret ongoing experiences in a negative manner. So a person who has a depressive cognitive triad, it's called a triad because it has these three elements. Number one, negative thoughts. Number two, feels pessimistic. Number three, they are processing every information in a negative way. And so there's a reason why there are therapies which help people get out of this depression phase. They focus on negative thoughts and pessimistic thinking and ongoing experiences, all of those facets. So what are negative schemas? They're cognitive structures containing memories about depressing events and thoughts. They're depressing schema, basically. The whole, like, the way the framework through which you see the world is depressive. People processing information through the schema attend to negative information. Again, you will only see the negative. They interpret ambiguous information in a depressing way. They recall depressing memories easily, associate current sad experience with past sad incidents. So everything is going through this filter. Everything is skewed in the negative direction. As people recover from an episode of depression, negative thoughts decline, but cognitive network remains unchanged. Okay? So it's very important to notice that if you have this depressive schema, you might be able to take care of the symptoms, but this cognitive network usually remains the same. Like if you're a pessimistic person, you will probably stay the same, but you can actively change the symptoms which are the result of that problem, if not the problem itself. Again, this was an important finding. What they did was they put happy experiences, unhappy experiences. So the light bar represents happy experiences and the dark bar represents unhappy experiences. And we're looking at the percentage of recalled experiences. They found that when people were more depressed, they recalled unhappy experiences a lot more. Whereas in the less depressed condition, people did not recall the unhappy experiences as much, but the happy experiences more. So it's kind of like contextual based recall, right? So if you're in a bad situation, you will start recalling more bad thoughts and bad emotions and all of that stuff. Negative cognitive style, it tends to be stable over time. It's related to depression. It's used to identify people who may be vulnerable to future episodes of depression. It predicts how adolescents react when encountering stressors in teenage years. It links between cognitive style and depression and may be affected by culture. So they did another study in which this shows the dark bar shows low risk, the light bar shows high risk. This is the no prior depression and prior depression. And you're looking at the person experiencing major depression, okay? So it shows that people who already had a depression, which means they already have this negative cognitive style, they are more likely to experience major depression than people who did not have prior depression. Because having prior depression is evidencing the presence of this style of thinking, which is negative cognitive style. Now we'll look at the application value of the cognitive approach, and CBT is one of the most famous psychotherapies, most famous evidential-based psychotherapies that we have in today's world. It helps recognize inappropriate thoughts and replace them with appropriate ones. Cognitive psychologists teach clients how to deal with future and recurring problems. It is limited to psychological problems that are based in irrational and self-defeating thinking, and it was developed and refined by Aaron Beck. So one of the applications of the cognitive approach is you are focusing on your cognition, your perceptions of reality, and you're targeting them, you're reframing these irrational perceptions into more healthier perceptions. Okay, so it doesn't mean that, oh, you're thinking negative. No, think positive. It's not like complete jump, but it's more like, come on, let's think more realistic here. Okay, so again, let's go to the fact of relationships, right? When if someone breaks up with you, you can choose to be like, oh, life is over, this is the end of my life. Or you could be like, well, people reject me, I reject people, doesn't mean I'm not worthy of love, and therefore I will be fine. There will always be, people rejecting and being rejected, and I'm not a narcissist to think that at all times I will be accepted by every single person in the world. And so this type of irrational, self-defeating thinking goes away and is replaced by more realistic, healthy way of thinking. The other type of application is the rational emotive behavior therapy. This was actually a predecessor of CBT, which we just spoke about. It was developed by Albert Ellis, right here, his picture. People become depressed, anxious, and upset due to faulty reasoning and reliance on irrational beliefs. So we have these beliefs that, oh, we're a certain thing, we're not this, we're not that. And so we become upset, we become anxious, we become depressed because we have all of these irrational beliefs going on. So the ABC process, it's activating experience, the irrational belief, the emotional consequence. And so he came up with this process called the ABC process, where you look at the activating experience, so which is the stimulus. And then the emotional consequence is basically the response, right? The reinforcement, the consequence. And so again, the middle part is the cognitive process, which is the irrational belief, is the meat, is the crux of why people are the way they are, why people are behaving the way they are behaving, feeling the way they're feeling. A person might feel anxious because of the irrational belief that, oh, look, this person should like me until the end of time, or this person should never break up with me because I'm just so good, right? And usually, like, if you are interested in REBT, they will teach you some words like shoulds, musts, that must never be used, because those really lead to irrational way of thinking, like, oh, he should like me, at all times, or he should be with me right now. Well, he could be with you, but that doesn't mean he should. And just because he isn't doesn't mean you couldn't. So it's a very interesting way of therapy. If you look at some YouTube videos on Albert Ellis and his wife, Debbie Ellis, she's amazing. She does such a great job with this, with rational emotive behavior therapy, and it almost like it confuses you a little bit the way she makes the argument. Unless you're sitting in the client's chair, it can be a little confusing, but it is a very sort of strong therapy. Like, it'll tell you to be, rational versus irrational. The goal of rational emotive behavioral therapy is clients must see their irrational beliefs and identify the fault in reasoning, and to replace irrational beliefs with rational ones. Okay? So something like, okay, if this situation is like this, doesn't mean it's going to be like this forever. It will change. Just because this relationship has ended doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Things change. New people come, old people go, right? And so it helps you become unstuck. Okay? So we'll look at some irrational beliefs here. Because I strongly desire to perform important tasks competently, I absolutely must perform them with more. And then there are subtle irrational beliefs, like, because I strongly desire, I want to succeed at them only some of the time, I absolutely must perform the tasks. So you can definitely go ahead and read this. These are some examples of irrational beliefs, obvious ones as well as subtle and tricky ones. The last part we'll talk about, actually we have a bunch of more stuff that we're going to look at. So we're going to look at the assessment part, the repertory grid technique, which George Kelly had proposed under his personal construct. So what he did was, the procedure is quite simple. He asked test takers to create a list of elements and consisting of specific people, and then he said, create a grid and allowed the people to see patterns across this set of information. Okay, and what this is helpful for, it's helpful for teaching effectiveness profiles of specific criminal type and career counseling. So this is an example. Okay, so to begin with, write down the names of the following 12 people that fit one of the categories. So let's say a teacher you like, a teacher you dislike, your wife and boyfriend, an employer, your mother. So you write down all the names of your favorite teacher, your worst teacher, and then what it says is name next, take these 3 of these people at a time by the numbers, then describe in what important ways 2 of them are alike and different from the third. Okay, so what happens is this creates the construct. So let's say a teacher you liked, a teacher you disliked, right? 6, 7. So let's say the person you liked, the person you didn't like, they all had something in common, which is they were all caring, they were all sensitive. So there you discovered a construct you used to evaluate the people you like. That's your construct. That's how you perceive the world, through that construct. And then the contrast would be, okay, so you like all these people because they're sensitive, sweet. So the contrast is you don't like people who are insensitive and not sweet. So that's how you can actually discover your own constructs through which you perceive the world. So the limitations of this approach does not generate a simple test scores. It's under several assumptions that constructs during test have some degree of permanence, right? You can always change, but it has that assumption. So again, this is another example of the grid. So your mom, dad, sister on a scale of pleasant, unpleasant, trustworthy, untrustworthy. These are all the constructs through which you assess these people. Pleasant, trustworthy, competitive, warm, intelligent, fun, all of these constructs. Now, last but not the least, let's look at the strengths and criticisms of the cognitive approach. The strengths are that the ideas develop through empirical findings, so it's empirically grounded. It uses extensive investigation, lab settings, and all of that. It fits well with the current mood of psychology, which is basically very pragmatic, like short term, let's go, brief, effective, efficient. Therapists from other approaches incorporate aspects of cognitive therapy in their practice. Okay, it's very practical, it's simple to use. The weaknesses are that concepts are too abstract sometimes, and indecisive to introduce to account for individual differences. So you can't. It's like one size fits all, right? It's a little tricky to evaluate or see the complexity or uniqueness of one individual through these approaches. And then no single model is there to organize and guide theory and research. There are multiple models like CBT, REBT, DBT, all of those different models. So with that, we conclude our presentation series on personality. This was the last lens of understanding personality. We went across the psychodynamic, biological, trait, behavioral, and cognitive approach. We've learned multiple lenses through which to understand personality. I hope you relished the knowledge that was presented to you and enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or comments, please do reach out. I would be more than happy to respond. Hope you have a great rest of your day. On to more discussions. All the best!